Gators Breakdown episode 45 is ready to go, and we are going to dive deeper and analyze new coaching hires Florida has made over the weekend. I talked about it in the previous podcast. We know the three names now, JaJuan Seider, Corey Bell, Brad Davis. We will dive even deeper into the hires, what they mean for Florida, and dive in with numbers, with analysis, that you can't find anywhere else but here on Gators Breakdown. I'm your host, David Waters. You can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC. And this week, early week podcast, joined by Joey and Bill. You can find Joey V, on Twitter at JoeyV_SEC Sports. And Bill Sykes joins us again at Real B Sykes on Twitter. You can find all your Gators Breakdown episodes on SoundCloud, iTunes, and YouTube. Just search on those sites. Get the links by following us on Twitter as well. At Gators Breakdown, and on Facebook, just search Gators Breakdown. If you like the show, leave a review, share it. That helps us out a lot. Get the word out there of Gators Breakdown. You can leave comments, and we'll respond on Twitter, YouTube, SoundCloud, all those avenues as well. Guys, Joey, Bill, thanks for joining me.
No problem, man. It's good to be back.
Good to be here again.
Oh yeah. Let's get this Gators Breakdown podcast with these coaches going. I mentioned the previous episode, I broke down these coaches, where they come from, and just dove a little bit into what these guys bring to the table. Joey, I'll go with you. We've talked about these hires ever since the firing, or not firing, since Mike Summers left. Offensive line coach went to Louisville, and we knew some other moves might be happening. I think we were kind of surprised by Torian Gray's move on Saturday when that was announced. But Joey, what was your initial reaction to the hires that Florida made over this past weekend?
A little surprised at the Davis, but I actually, and Bill can actually attest to this, I called Corey Bell before the hire was even announced. I said to Bill, on Twitter, I said, Corey Bell's the next DB coach at Florida, and literally, I think an hour or two later, he was announced. So I know that him and Randy Shannon are like best friends. They go way back. He had just been hired at South Florida by Charlie Strong to coach defensive backs, and he is actually his recruiting coordinator there too. So obviously Charlie believes he can recruit. I'm pretty sure Randy Shannon made one call to him, and he said, "I love you, and I will be there, within the hour." So position at South Florida, and drove, 2 hours. And I absolutely love the hire. He's a South Florida guy, was at Miami for under Shannon for many years, coached down South Florida high school, and he's been kind of bouncing around a little bit the last couple of years, but I love that hire.
Bill, what you think? Your initial reaction of the hires. Were you surprised as I was about hearing Torian Gray going to the NFL?
Yeah, that one actually did catch me by surprise, but at the same time, the guy had some experience there, and so it's not a shock that he would want to go back. I mean, everybody talks about how that's an easier life for those guys that don't have to recruit, kind of enjoy that rock star lifestyle, and so it wasn't that big of a shock. And I think that Mac certainly went a different direction, which we're going to get into numbers wise here in a little bit with Bell, but I think he offered some good upside, and he was not somebody that I was really taken aback by. I mean, his name really made the rounds last go round right before they brought in Gray. And he's somebody that I think one of the big programs was destined to make a move on him. But we saw Charlie Strong take the guy, after he had spent a little time at Miami. He had, kind of worked his way up through the Florida schools. This one was going to happen for somebody. And I think that there's a high potential for some serious reward for McElwain for taking it.
All right, I'll ask you guys this, and Bill, I know you'll back it up with numbers, and Joey might have some too. Is JaJuan Seider the home run hire we think he is when he's hired by Florida? We know McElwain was after him for more than just this past season. He was trying to come in before, had some family issues with his son being sick, and that kind of halted him coming to Florida in years before. So, Joey, is it the home run hire we think it is?
Oh, absolutely. You just go look on social media at all the West Virginia fans that were basically, with knife to wrist over the weekend when they found out that he was leaving. They're really devastated. I mean, JaJuan Seider is not only a great recruiter, but he's an excellent coach. I think West Virginia had the 24th ranked rushing attack in college football last 2 years. Florida was ranked 100 and somewhere around there. So, we could definitely say that he's not only a good recruiter, but he's a really good coach, which, Florida bringing in Malik Davis, and Adarius Lemons, 2 young guys that need some coaching. You got a promising back in LaMichael Pirine, as we know, and you got Jordan Scarlett, who I believe is a top 5 running back in the Southeastern Conference. I think JaJuan Seider could easily improve Florida's rushing attack while obviously dominating the living rooms and going into people's homes, kicking down doors and getting recruits, especially in South Florida. He is from Glades area. They call it the Muck down there. You can go down there into Glade Central and, where Kelvin Taylor's from and Janoris Jenkins and those guys and pretty much get whoever they want out of that school. So that's going to help a lot. Also, like you said, Dave, McElwain was after him his first year at Florida. Tried to hire him, but he had some issues with his son with some cancer battling and couldn't make it up here. But I also heard that Will Muschamp was after him when he was at Marshall previously to him being at West Virginia the year or 2 before. And Seider turned him down as well when he was at Marshall. But he's an excellent recruiter. We all know that. And we know that he's a much better running backs coach, I think, than we've had in a while. So I'm pretty excited about the all around with that hire. I think obviously he's the most stable hire that Florida's probably made in the last week because people know who he is. They know his name. They know what he can do.
Bill, it is more than just about chasing rabbits down there in the muck, right?
I don't know, man. They swear by it down there. But yeah, hey, listen, JaJuan Seider is a guy that has recruited 4-star South Florida athletes, and I mean several of them, to leave South Florida and go to West Virginia. And let me tell you, I speak from experience. I have lived in West Virginia before with work. That's a culture shock for these kids. And anybody that can get that done, that alone tells me all we need to know about his ability to recruit. Okay, but the guy, like Joey said, he's had success as a coach at West Virginia. He's a known commodity. He's a hometown hero at Belglade where he played football and then eventually left town. He's a guy that has quality relationships. And, I'm funny about that term in recruiting, but when I say he has relationships, I mean connections. I mean, this is a guy, it's not what you know, it's who you know. Well, if you know JaJuan Seider is probably going to know the right coaches to get Florida in the door. They're going to be very tough to beat in Palm Beach County now. They're going to be very tough to beat in Pahokee and in Belglade. This is a real coup for McElwain, and I think that he's going to pay immediate dividends.
Bill, looking at, I know you've broken down a little bit. What is this, the numbers for South Florida? And before this show, we all three kind of discussed, how Florida really has struggled, South Florida recruiting, and we really couldn't come up with, the biggest name in recent years in South Florida, besides when Jim McElwain came in, Jordan Scarlett, Antonio Callaway. We know the names there. What is Seider bringing to the table, and when you look at it analytically and how you crunch some numbers?
Well, it's not just Seider. And I'll tell you what got me looking into the numbers for this is I really the one thing I was taken aback by was the fact that we have Randy Shannon on staff, and Matt goes out and hires another South Florida recruiter in Seider. Then he goes out and gets Bell. And I'm like, okay, well, who's going to recruit Miami? And if you've got a guy with connections in Miami, what good is he to you in Tallahassee or Pensacola? So I started digging into where these recruits are from. And I have been following recruiting since the early 90s, over 20 years, and I really did not catch how disproportionate the numbers are now with top prospect distribution in the state of Florida. And what I did is I took the composite 24/7 rankings for in-state talent. And after we talked the other night, I knew I needed to adjust for IMG. And so what I did is I did a top 50 for each year of McElwain's tenure, 2015, 2016, 2017, and the 2018 top 50. And I separated the IMG kids and added so we'd have a real top 50. And then I went back to Urban Meyer's first 4 years, 2005, 2006, 2007, and 2008. Now get this. In 2018, when you look at the top 50, let me get my spreadsheet here. My apologies. Okay. The top 50 when you adjust for IMG, 37% of the kids, okay, that's 26 of the top 50 are from Dade and Broward for 2018. Half of your 5 stars, 4 stars, and best 3 stars are from 2 counties in South Florida. Okay, this past year for the 2017 cycle, it was 42% and 21 overall. 2016 was 42% with 21 overall. 2015 was 40% with 20 overall.
What was the 2018 number again?
26 this coming year. So we've gone from 20 to 21 to 21 to 26 of the top 50 adjusted are in Dade and Broward County. So it's not only almost half already, now it's becoming lopsided to where the majority of the top 50 is in Miami. But if you go back and look at what Urban Meyer dealt with when he first got here, that number of the top 50 was 17 in 2005, 12 in 2006, 13 in 2007, and 17 in 2008. You had a much stronger presence from the Tampa and Lakeland areas. You had a better distribution from Jacksonville, Palm Beach County, Orlando. Some of these areas, while not taking a lion's share, we're still having a strong presence in there. So there wasn't quite as much of a need to focus as heavily on Dade Broward as there is now. And, I'm not so sure you even approach this from the same way at this point. When you've got all that many kids, number one, it's not surprising that we took 10 of 23 out of there this year. You know what I'm saying? Because half the state's top talent is down there. But do you have one guy handle that area? I don't think you do. I think you maybe have overlapping territories, and maybe Seider does spend some time in the muck. Maybe he does spend some time in Palm Beach County. But if he's got a friend at Southridge, he hangs out there. And maybe if Bell has a friend at Edison High School in Miami, he's going to swing by there. I think they're going to have to do it. And, I haven't really seen this mentioned anywhere, but this is a seismic shift. It's not the same recruiting landscape in the state as what Urban Meyer dealt with when he had success, when he could go down to Tampa and pluck the top 5 or 6 kids out of there without having to worry about Miami.
Right.
Yeah,
so Joey,
I actually just looking at, Bill, what you were saying about recruits this coming year in South Florida. I think McElwain's being strategic right now. I think that he's literally trying to sell out for the 2018 class. I don't think he's just trying to be a top 5 class. I think he's trying to be the number 1 class, Bill. And here you go. You got in 24/7's composite for 2018, you got the number 1 running back out of University High School down there, Lorenzo Lingard, who, Florida's going to have to take a running back next year for sure. We know that, a big time running back. You got also out of South Florida, you have a top wide receiver, Justin Ross out of South Florida, Miami Central, actually. And also you got out of St. Thomas Aquinas, one of the top cornerbacks, Al Blades Jr., out of St. Thomas Aquinas. So you got 3 positions of need that Florida's going to have to address next year, at probably the 3 top of the maybe 3 or 4 best players in the country at their position down in South Florida. So I think McElwain knows what he's doing. He already has his big board up for next 2018 class, and he's trying to kick down doors. And that's what he's doing with these hires. He's trying to kick down doors, and he's trying to get commitments before the summer even starts. Obviously, Florida just got a big commitment from Devad Wilson. We just saw it the other day. He's only a 3-star right now, but I do see him becoming a 4th star probably by the end of the summer. He's got a buddy that Florida just extended an offer to as well, who's not unranked, but, supposedly still getting looks. So, I really think McElwain's trying to sell out for South Florida this class. I think he's trying to be the number 1 class. I think he knows that Miami, Dade County, and Broward County are coming back to being, elite recruiting grounds again. And they had a lull we just discussed earlier. They had a lull for about maybe 7 or 8 years, but I think it's coming back now. And, I would absolutely love for McElwain to sell out, which it seems like he's doing. And, like I said, these guys are good coaches too. He's not just hiring people that are good in the living room. We know JaJuan Seider can coach running backs. We know that, Davis can coach offensive line. I mean, he did it. He was a national championship as an offensive tackle under Bob Stoops, for Oklahoma. And, he's had a couple good stops. He was a co-offensive coordinator at James Madison. Granted, that's that's an FCS school, but they're a pretty damn good FCS program. If you know James Madison, I mean, they're an elite program in the football subdivision. And he was the co-offensive coordinator there for a couple of years, and then went to East Carolina, McNeil for a couple of years. And then, obviously went to North Texas and I'm just really excited to see what McElwain's got cooking. And, as I discussed on Twitter earlier, Dave, we've been hearing rumors circulating that, there might be another coach leaving, in the near future. So that'll be another, spot to fill. So I don't think we're done yet on hires. And I could see probably a hire or two, maybe even 3 in the next couple of days.
Yeah, I think, Joey, I like what you and Bill both said. And I think when you combine what you both said, these are hires to get Florida more on par with FSU and Alabama. Florida this past cycle, already out recruited Miami down in their own territory. Ended up, signing day passing Tennessee, but that's not what we know Florida for. That's not Florida recruiting. Florida, for what we know to be Florida to be, we've seen other, especially Alabama, come down to South Florida, get cherry-picked wide receivers, go on and have success with them. Florida, these moves for JaJuan Seider and Bell were to get back on the level of FSU and Alabama recruiting. And it starts, reading the numbers, it starts right down there in this 2018 class in South Florida.
Yeah, I completely agree. And, here's the thing. When I'm looking at these numbers for 2018, aside from Miami, you got your IMG kids. And I do think Florida has a good shot, at least with one of them, would be the quarterback, Arthur Sitkowski. But he's actually from New Jersey, so we've talked about that. You can't really count them. But, there's 10 guys in Lakeland, so they'll have a presence there in the top 50. But you've only got 2 in Palm Beach County area. You've only got 3 in the Orlando to Daytona corridor, none in the Big Bend in the top 50, 1 in the Gainesville, Ocala areas, 3 in the Panhandle, none in the Muck, none in the Space Coast, and none in Southwest Florida. That talent's in Tampa a little bit, and it's in Dave Broward. And so I think, like you said, Joey, I think that McElwain knows, look, he's done a good job, but he doesn't have 5 more years to build up this roster. He's got to at least have this thing rolling by 2018. And so I think he's saying, hey, look, I've got Franks in here, or Trask, or whoever I'm going to roll with. Now's the time. And you can't sit back and say, well, Surtain and Blades, their legacies elsewhere. I think he's going to take his connections down there with Seider and with Bell and with Shannon. And I think they're going to hit these guys head on this year. I think they may go down in flames. But this is what I want to see out of McElwain. I think he's going to step up to the plate, toe the line, and try to make a boss move. And I would fully expect, I think they're going to have another 10-man Miami-Dade, Broward County, Fort Lauderdale class as part of the recruiting class this year. Let's just hope it works.
Yeah, I actually saw that Zach Elbaverde put about how many kids that Florida can take next year in the cycle, and it ended up being about 21. That was what he kind of guessed with players leaving, transfers, spots available on scholarship next year. So 21 spots is not that much, so Florida's really going to have to be picky and choosy about who they take. And if you want to get the number 1 class, or at least the top 5 class, with only 21 spots available, which seems about likely realistic, you're going to have to hit some 5 stars in those 21 spots. You just are.
Yeah, I don't think they can get to number 1 with 21 guys. I mean, you're talking about, you got to pack a serious punch. I mean, you're talking about 6 5-stars probably to get that done. But if they're in the top 5, or even show me number 9, I want to see progress. If you just get to number 9 and land a 5-star, I'm going to say, okay, we're moving in the right direction.
Yeah, I think Florida has to get a 5-star this year, Bill. It's been a while. Florida hasn't had that big name. Martez Ivy obviously was a 5-star. CeCe Jefferson was a 5-star, but that was 2 years ago.
Yep.
Florida didn't have a 5-star last year. Florida didn't have a 5-star this year. Florida needs to land a marquee name like a Lorenzo Lingard, somebody like that, a big marquee name of, that really flashes across your screen. And, Florida State had it with Cam Akers this year. Alabama had it with Alex Leatherwood and several others. These big programs are getting these marquee names, and Florida has yet to do that. And in Florida, I think Jim McElwain is trying to go down, kick doors down, and get some marquee players. And I love that.
Hey, Bill.
Go ahead. I'm sorry, David.
No, yeah, because I was going to dive into the stat you and I discussed on Twitter, and that kind of goes with what Joey just brought up. I think you said recent Florida coaches Zuckenmeyer and Muschamp signed on average 10.69 4-stars per class. In 2017, this past class, McElwain signed 11. And I responded with on Twitter, and I'm assuming McElwain is complimenting more with 3 stars than 5 stars. And so, I think we know that if that's the case, so it just brings up the point Joey just brought up was, yes, it's time to get the 5 stars rolling in. Yes, we're happy with what Florida did. Yes, we're happy with what signing day ended up being. But, we can still critique a little bit. And the biggest critique is you got to get the elites. You got to start getting the 5 stars.
Yeah, you're talking about a group of prospects that traditionally since 2002 have made first team all SEC about 35% of the time. You sign 3 of those guys, one of them is going to end up one of your Gator greats. So those guys, when you sign them, they're a big deal. And those guys are going to Bama. They are going to FSU. They're going to a lot of other programs. And 2015 and 2016 were a historic low for Florida. And that was the first back-to-back period with no 5 stars since I can find record for. The only other year I have found that we're not any was Urban Meyer's transition class, his first partial short-time class in 2005. So that's a problem. I mean, if you look at the stats, it says that previously, like before McElwain came in from 2002 to 2014, Gator coaches averaged 2.54 a year. Now, that's including their transition classes. Since then, McElwain's averaging 0.67 a year. He hasn't signed one since his first year when he had, lifelong Gator fans in Martez Ivy and CeCe Jefferson. But for the first time, think about this for a second. If those guys go pro early this year, after the 2017 season, and McElwain doesn't sign one again, there will not be a single 5-star prospect on the roster in Gainesville, Florida. That is not acceptable. It is not acceptable. It has to change this year.
Not with so many you have within driving distance. And that's what we talk about with Florida. You have all these recruits around. And yes, I mean, I know it sounds like we're nitpicking folks, but these are the little things that add up. And these are the little things that matter when you're going against. We've seen it firsthand at the end of the past 2 seasons. FSU loaded with 5 stars. Alabama loaded with 5 stars. We've seen the difference firsthand. Yes, I know we know the quarterback, issue number 1. We know that. But it's also help around those guys. And, Florida has to start getting these 5 stars. Jim McElwain, we mentioned the 4 stars. He's getting that there is progress. There's one more step. And that is getting the elite. So, Bill, I just don't think, that we can actually just stress that enough. I know it sounds like we're nitpicking, and I know it sounds like, McElwain can't coach up these 3s and 4 stars that he's getting. Yes, we've seen it. We've seen some 4 stars play like 5 stars and in Jordan Scarlett and mainly Antonio Callaway. He's right now, the way he plays, yes, they've done some great scouting with these young linebackers we're talking about, but we know there's proof. You've got to get the 5 stars.
Yeah, and every coach signs, those hidden gems at Florida too. I mean, remember Muschamp signed Quincy Wilson. He signed Gerard Davis. And so McElwain is doing a great job with there. He's just got to get over that hump. He's right there, and he's doing a lot of great things. We talked about the blue chip percentage has risen every year he's been there. His rankings with his recruiting classes have risen both in conference and nationally. He signed the most 4 stars he signed this year. He just about hit the average. He was just above the average for what other Gator coaches have signed by signing 11, where the average, I believe, was 10.67 annually. But most of those coaches had those 2.54 5 stars a year. And so if he can get those 2-3 extra players, start getting those top 100 players, he will turn the corner and start to close the talent gap. But it hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, and it's not just 5 stars. You're just looking at, your top 100 or so guys as well, where Florida, I think, has struggled in that area. Tadero Slayton, I believe, is the only one. Now, I know if you go and look at other recruiting services, some recruiting services did have Slayton as a 5-star. So, if we want to nitpick, I think Rivals had Slayton as a 5-star. Rivals or Scout, one of the two had him as a 5-star. I guess we should say, Bill and I should say, we follow 24/7 the most. When we talk about recruiting rankings and services, it's mostly 24/7 composite where we come up with these numbers. So if you're screaming out there, we did have a 5-star this past class. We hear you. We get that. But we are using 24/7 as our database and as our baseline there. So, Bill, is there anything else that can point to, in the top 100, just starting to go get those guys too? I mean, I just don't think we can mention enough. We got to get the elite.
Yeah, it's just all about that. And those guys are elite. I mean, we like to draw these arbitrary lines, but
Right.
the top 100 kids can play, man. It's just, there's just those certain guys out there you see that are freaks, the Tebows of the world, the Percy Harvins of the world. When you see them on the highlight tape in high school, Bubba in his recliner knows that guy's going to be a first-round draft pick. So you got to go get those guys, man.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to point to in South Florida. You've heard it. Oh, I'll take a 3-star from South Florida over a 3-star anywhere. You know what? Okay, and more than likely, that probably means those guys play like 4 stars, or end up playing like 5 stars. We've seen that time and time again.
Yeah, and hey, you know what? That is one positive I wanted to point out. We were just talking about this before we went on air. I think you posed the question and said, "Hey, what was the last guy that Florida signed that was big time in Miami and went to have a great career?" And so I started thumbing through these classes. Florida hasn't signed hardly anybody from Miami. I mean, you had like Tarian Charles, who kind of had some troubles, off the field way back, almost 15 years ago. Then you had a few other ones, Dorian Monroe and things like that. But you had nobody. And it should be said, Jim McElwain has just kicked the door down on Miami and pillaged like a Viking. I mean, the guy is good. And then he's like hiring these coaches to go in there and claim the territory as his own. It's like he's saying, "Hey, I'm going to build a wall in here and Mark Richt's going to pay for it."
I went to school with Dorian Monroe at Florida. I actually lived in the building next to him over there in Oxford Manor and right off Archer. And Dorian is a great guy. Did you know Dorian made the list of 100 greatest players out of all time out of Dade County?
I did not know that.
Cool players of all time out of Dade County. Dorian Monroe out of Coral Reef was a stud. He was a big get for Urban Meyer. Huge, actually.
That's awesome. Well, yeah, and you know what? It looks like he won't be the last now. I mean, Mac is, like I said, he's set up camp in there. And some of these kids he got out of there, they actually were big time.
Yeah, we mentioned the hire of Davis and how it was surprising. I know some guys were disappointed because we had heard bigger names that might be coming in among this offensive line coach in there. So, I mean, I know I'm kind of straying. We were talking about coaches. We kind of went to recruiting and all that. But I'll kind of mingle the two together here. How does Davis fit in this recruiting for Florida moving forward? I think, we mentioned his time at North Texas and East Carolina the past 2 years. Meanwhile, if you didn't catch the last one, if you didn't put that together, he's visited the swamp the last 2 years. North Texas this past year, East Carolina the year before that. But how does he fit on the recruit? Do you stick him? I mean, where do you stick him? I don't think you stick him in South Florida because you've got that pretty much covered now with Shannon, Bell, and Seider. Do you hit Jacksonville harder? Do you hit I-4 corridor harder? Do you spread him out between there? Do you keep him out west? Texas, Louisiana, Alabama a little bit, the Panhandle. How do you guys see him fitting in to recruiting?
I think you got to get somebody, David, for Jacksonville. Florida's kind of lost a stronghold on the Jacksonville area, and you can attest to this. You're a Jacksonville native yourself.
Yep. Me too.
yeah, there you go, Bill. Florida kind of used to dominate Jacksonville, David. I mean, and any of the coaches for Florida usually could walk into somebody's living room in Jacksonville and just get a signature right then and there. It's not like that anymore, and that needs to change. Florida's had some big-time recruits out of the Jacksonville area, obviously, in the last, 10 years, 15 years. But recently, Jacksonville's biggest prize recruit ended up going to Columbus this year.
Yep.
And, unfortunately, that happened. And, Jacksonville, another prize recruit, spurned Florida for Alabama a couple years ago out of Yulee. You might know him, a guy named Derrick Henry. So,
that's because that head coach said he'd play defense.
That head coach.
I don't know. I heard that was a myth.
I've heard it both ways. Some Yulee guys have backed it up. Some have said.
I think what the coach said was all of my players are going to play defense. They sure as hell didn't play offense.
If Will Muschamp never fielded an offense and he literally played defense for 60 minutes, he would be okay with that. Will Muschamp would play defense for 60 minutes, and he would be satisfied because he knows his defense can win 10-6.
Yeah, Charlie Weiss left because Muschamp was like, "Hey, man, let's punt on second down." And he was like, "I don't want to do that, boss."
Yeah, exactly. Or Charlie Weiss just wanted to raid the snack refrigerator. Did you know that guy had a food cart that he sat on during practices? He literally had one of those motorized cooler that he would drive around during practice, one of those ones with the handlebars and everything, and they had snacks in them. That's a true story.
That guy, man. He's got
worst
the Lane
hire
Kiffin
Florida's
path,
ever
too.
made. Worst hire. Worst
He fails
hire.
upward.
Yeah, by the people that fired him than he does by his current employers. Yeah.
Maybe he's got it all figured out.
He does.
Hey, listen, here's
Get
what
fired,
I think
get
about
paid.
this. You know, I'm looking at this, and you hit it more in the micro sense. I'm going to hit it in the macro sense. I think from a profile stance, I think this guy is part of a changing persona of how Jim McElwain envisions his program. He's fiery, he's young, he's energetic, he's up and coming. I think that's what McElwain wants for his team. I think they had a little bit of an image, at least amongst the fans. And so maybe this isn't fair to say it was amongst other programs and players, kind of laid back, maybe older, stuffy, not with it, really lagging behind in the Joker Phillips edit days, poor facilities. I think Mac wants it all turned around. I think he wants to charge into enemy fire and saying, we're coming to get you. And I think he wants that for his offensive line. I think he wants that for the whole roster. I mean, if you look at this, I'm going to break down a few numbers here. While the age overall of their coaching staff is only a little bit lower right now, the hires, like you mentioned earlier, they're about 5 years younger on average than the guys that were already on staff. They're in that mid-40s on average. I think Davis is only 39 years old.
Yep.
They're going with less experience, especially in the NFL. 2015, they had 9 years combined experience, then 7. Now they've only got 6 on the coaching staff. Their non-grad assistant college coaching experience is lower. They were 17.7 years on average in 2015. They're down to 15.6 now. He's trading in guys that maybe have a few more years, a little more long in the tooth, for guys that are hard-charging young assistants. He's going for guys, now get this, between Seider and Bell, they have 23 years experience coaching in Florida combined on the high school level. Now, we talked about that on relational level. They didn't have a year of that when McElwain got there. They only had one guy on the staff in 2015 that was born in Florida. Now they got 3. I think they want to be known as a local, heavy, fiery, in-your-face, old-school Florida, we're coming to get you mentality. And I love it. I don't have to have every coach with a 20-year, NFL pedigree.
Yeah.
Go get the recruits. Go to war with your players. That's what I want to see.
There you go. You got to relate. And I think it was Jim McElwain after his press conference against Iowa in the bowl game. We got to get tougher up front. And I think you probably saw that with this move. It was I mean, how many times did we see Florida come out on an offensive line against North Texas in UMass where the offensive line would consistently get blown up? They can't tackle. They can't push. The running lanes weren't there. That was just part of motivating, and we know that's what Davis brings. We've seen the article, we've seen reports where he's had articles written in motivational magazines and all that. It's more than just about the game of football sometimes, and it's just getting into these players' heads, as Bill mentioned and you guys mentioned. It's relating to the young guys, and I mentioned that in the previous podcast. That's what I would completely agree. That's why they brought these guys. That's why they're getting younger. They got to start relating to the recruits and the young guys in the locker room, because we've seen Florida run into that tunnel, and it's exciting, and come out in that first drive of the game and not being able to bust a grape for the entire game. And that kind of they got better as the season went on. I'll give them that. Some more young guys got on the offensive line, of course, and McCoy and Taylor out there, and we saw some improvement. But there was just too many times where they came out so lackadaisical that it just did not fit. And I think you really can point the finger at Mike Summers there.
I'm just going to put this out there. We talked last week about, Alabama being the standard. Florida has to focus on Florida State right now. I don't think you can even look at Alabama right now in the state you're in. You're losing to Florida State in recruiting, and you haven't beat Florida State in 4 years in football. Everybody on Florida State's roster doesn't know what it feels like to lose to Florida right now, and that's embarrassing. And the guys on Florida's roster don't know what it's like to beat Florida State. I mean, your biggest rival in state that you battle in every sport, you battle in recruiting, your students battle off the field, your administration battles, you haven't beat them in 4 years, and this could be a 5th, and you're losing to them and getting your tails whooped on the recruiting trail every year. So Florida's measuring stick right now is not Alabama, okay? It is Florida State. You have to beat Florida State in the living room. You have to beat Florida State on the field, and then you can post the posters of "We want Bama" in the stands. because right now Florida can't even beat, the ACC's second best team. So how are you going to beat the SEC's best team right now? Needs to focus on beating Florida State, I think, this coming year. I think that's the number one focus that you have to have as far as, I guess a goal. Every year a team has a goal. I think Florida's goal obviously is not only to get back to Atlanta for third year straight, but I think you have to beat Florida State. They're coming in the swamp. Florida most likely will have that cupcake game before Florida State. They're not going to have to go to LSU again, like they did this year. That was a fluke. So, Florida is going to have to get ready to beat Florida State. And you know what? When you beat Florida State, if you beat Florida State this year, that's going to help recruiting. Recruits are going to be in the swamp for that game, and you're going to, an in-state rivalry, and you're going to be able to break the spear in half in Gainesville and, send Florida State home with a loss. And, hopefully Florida State's been picked by many already to win the national championship next year. So ranked number one at the time when they come into the swamp, how incredible would that be? Florida beating number one ranked Florida State to spoil their season. Nothing would be better in my opinion, so stick right now. And then you could focus on winning the SEC championship, after that. So Florida right now kind of, started from scratch basically, when they hired McElwain. McElwain's done something that I think people are not giving him enough credit for. Obviously, David, we've spoke on this most of the year. McElwain basically took a bunch of spare parts in a garage and built a car and made it run. And, it runs effectively. He basically took, bald tires, a broke down engine, a leaking radiator, and, the ripped upholstery and in a busted frame, and put together a car that not only drives on the road, but it drives pretty fast. So, but you're not going to be able to go against a Ferrari and beat it yet. And that's what I was getting at. So, people need to give McElwain credit for what he's been able to put together. For the car, aka the quarterback's basically been, Treon Harris. You get Will Grier for six games, looks sensational for half of those, but then you get Treon Harris, you got Luke Del Rio and Austin Appleby for 2 of the seasons that you've coached. So let's give the guy a little bit of a pass. But guess what? This is year 3. Pretty good recruiting class this year. Not great, obviously, but pretty good. And a lot of veterans on the offensive line, 9 returning starters on offense. Hopefully a pretty darn good quarterback this year. Just incredible to think that Florida, the University of Florida hasn't had a quarterback in 8 years. That's the standard right now. You have to beat your biggest in-state rival, and you have to beat them on the trail this coming year. And you have to starts with beating them on the field in November, Bill. And I'm sure you can agree with everything I just said.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, people forget it was back when Florida played FSU in 2005. They went out and just whipped FSU 34-7, and it caused a landslide in recruiting. And Meyer was off to the races. I mean, that win propelled them. They, landed guys like Tebow, and of course he was coming anyway. But the Pounceys and Harvin and those guys. You've got to get over the hump with your rivals. You've got to have a signature win. And as good as LSU was this year, as good as Ole Miss was the year before, there has to be a coming out party at some point for Jim McElwain. And I do agree that you give the guy time. He did, turn a bucket of bolts into a working automobile. But like you said, he's got to turn that thing into a Ferrari because it's the University of Florida. And, I think a big win against FSU this year will do it. I think he's got this year. I think he's got next year. Beyond that, it's going to get real, real hot.
Yeah, I wouldn't even say, David, I mean, we talked about this. I think obviously, this year and next year is guaranteed possibly a 4th year, barring obviously a collapse. But David, can you imagine if Florida hobbles into the SEC championship game again for a 3rd straight year and gets blown out by Alabama again for a 3rd straight year after losing to Florida State in the last game of the season? I mean, the Boo Birds will be out. McElwain, barring a number 1 recruiting class, which isn't going to happen if that happens again. Florida will not even have a top 10 class next year if it's rinse and repeat of the same thing, because recruits are basically going to look at you and be like, this is what you are. You are what you are. What did Bill Parcells' famous saying? You are what your record says you are. And basically that's what recruits and fans are going to look at Jim McElwain and say, look, Jim, this is year 3. You are what your record says you are. You know, Bill, you could attest to this. You just did. You said you have to show improvement. At your most important position, you have to show improvement at the quarterback position. These are Jim McElwain's recruits. These 2 guys, Franks and Trask, will battle it out. 9 returning starters on offense. Most of them are his guys. Everybody on defense is his guy. So there's no more excuses, Bill. This is year 3. I think you got to beat Michigan, Bill. I think you have to beat Michigan in game 1. You got 8 months of offseason to prepare for Michigan. You're already preparing right now. You're putting in a game plan in spring practice right now to beat Michigan and set the tone for the entire season. Bill, can you imagine if Michigan's probably going to be ranked top 5 this year? Can you imagine if Florida goes into Jerry World of the first weekend of the season and punches Michigan right in the mouth and sets the tone for the year? People are going to be looking at Florida and be like, look, they're the real deal. And not only are media going to be looking at Florida and saying that, fans and recruits, Bill, recruits are going to be looking at Florida and saying the real deal. Florida's going to have a nationally televised primetime game against Michigan the first week of the season when you literally have the entire offseason to prepare. Alabama went and punched USC right in the face and drug them in the dirt in that same game this past year. And Florida's going to have a chance to do it to Michigan this year. And I think Florida has to. If you lose this game, Bill, especially if you lose in an embarrassing fashion, just ruined your season, because not only are you going to have trouble recruiting for the next couple months, but basically you're playing from behind, Bill. You already got a loss on your schedule, and we know that the college football playoff, it doesn't look very kindly on the SEC East.
Yeah, you know, I don't know. The one place I would disagree with you, I think if they lost to Michigan and kept it respectable, it doesn't kill you, because you've only got like 3 away games. Well, blown out is a different story. And you dang well better show a functional offense from the get-go.
Yeah.
Okay?
It can't be the bowl game from the Michigan. It can't be
that's
the
right.
Michigan
You
bowl
cannot
game
have a
from Michigan.
repeat of that.
Yeah.
But you've only got like 3 away games, and it's like Kentucky, Missouri, and South Carolina. You get FSU at home to cap the season. That is his moment. Beat FSU. But you got Georgia and Jacksonville. I don't like the prospects of losing to Eason and that as his coming out party. But you could almost drop that one, and you get Tennessee at home and LSU at home. Get revenge on Tennessee this year. You could recover from a loss at Michigan, you know, theoretically. But like you said, this thing's got to get rolling. I love you, Luke Del Rio. You got to roll with a young quarterback. It needs to be Franks or Trask. He's got to show that he can put a quarterback in and get this thing rolling, period.
Yeah, I doubt Del Rio's the guy, David. You know, especially with the injury, he's not even involved in the game plan this spring. I'm pretty sure that, you know, this is basically a Trask and Franks party, and whoever, you know, decides to party harder is going to be the guy. So,
hey, one other thing, and this is cause for concern. And as happy as we are about these hires, you know, I think I mentioned to David, I'm looking at this. You got a new defensive coordinator, a new secondary coach. Tim Skipper is going to probably slide over to linebackers. You got a new linebackers coach. You got a new offensive line coach. You got a new running back coach, and Greg Nord may leave. That is an overhaul. That's a fire sale on coaches. You're completely turning over your staff for the most part. We may have more staff members that we've heard about there that could be leaving. There's going to be a continuity problem here. And then you cap that off with having a first-year redshirt freshman quarterback. This is a lot to ask, guys. We're sitting here talking about him needing to get this going to year 3. The schedule's perfect, but I'm not sure the timing is for a young quarterback in what it amounts to almost a brand new staff.
Yeah, the continuity really is on the offensive side of the ball with McElwain and Nussmeier. For right now, hint, hint, Kerry Dixon.
And remember, we've got a lot of new starters coming into that defense.
Right, and that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm about to say. And if you move to the other side of the ball, you mentioned all the new names you have on defense, plus.
But are we saying Randy Shannon is not continuity? Those players begged for him to be the defensive coordinator because they knew that his verbiage is very similar to what Jeff Collins was. I mean, Randy Shannon, we saw the defense didn't skip a beat with Randy Shannon. So It's not like they just brought somebody new in. So I wouldn't say the drop-off on the coordinator spot is as much as maybe it would be if somebody came in from the outside.
Well, I'm not really talking about drop-off in quality at all. I'm talking about newness. I'm talking about, you know, Brad Davis's way of doing things. Because remember, we just got done talking about he's a totally different personality. He's going to have total different expectations than the laid-back, you know, Kentucky Mike Summers had. It's going to be totally different. And so you're going to have that at each position to a certain extent. And also remember, everything went well, but you had a lot. That was a very salty defense of veteran players there that he could pretty much just put them on autopilot and go. These are going to be a lot of young guys that are going to have a lot of mental things to digest.
Yeah, I think it is.
At least the safety position shored up with veterans. That's a very important position to have veterans at.
Yeah, and hey, I'm not saying they can't do it. It's just going to be a lot to ask. So you may see a speed bump earlier too.
Yeah, there's definitely something to keep an eye on because you mentioned that you have many names there, many names on the defensive side of the ball, on the field, and coaching there. And as I mentioned, a little bit of continuity in offense with Nussmeier, Michael Wayne. Of course, they're going to head up the offense there. So yeah, but you do mention and we've mentioned Seider, how well of a coach he is, how good of a coach he is. You bring him in and let him coach him up too. So it is something to keep an eye on if that's any effect there. Before we sign off here,
a positive note in the Michigan game. Michigan lost about 100 players to graduation in the draft. So
yeah, I think they beat Michigan. That's why I said that last week. They're going to beat them.
Yeah. So they do have their quarterback coming back. Their starting quarterback will be back, but obviously we saw that his ceiling isn't very high. They're losing obviously Jake Budd and Jabril Peppers and a couple of their star wide receivers, and obviously, a couple defensive backs and stuff like that. But I do like Florida's chances in the game, Bill. And obviously, as we get closer to that game, we're already previewing it. Basketball season hasn't even peaked yet, but we're already previewing that game. But I like Florida's chances in that game, Bill. I really do, because Florida has the advantage as far as returning starters.
Yeah, 20 starters or whatever it is, that's a lot to replace. I think Florida will play well under McElwain because I think he gets his guys ready to play for the most part. I think they take care of business. For sure.
Before we wrap up here on Gators Breakdown, as we analyze these coaching hires, I know we want to take one last kind of final look at the class of 17 before we get off here. And Bill and Joey mentioned it. I know they kind of wanted to talk about, and we brought it up last week, the defensive tackle position. We know how much of a need it was for Florida to get some bodies in there this past recruiting class. Elijah Conliffe, Daryl Slayton are your two big signees at those positions. And can they live up to the billing of what Florida has had in the past? The two big names you bring up, if you start thinking of a pairing, Sharif Floyd, Dominic Easley, those are the last two guys, who come in together, two guys who we could count on from day one to be superstar defensive tackles. Guys, can Slayton and Conliffe live up to what we're looking for at that very important defensive tackle position? And do we expect them to get some playing time early?
I think they have to get playing time early. You've got nothing behind your starters. This is a crisis for depth. But the good news is, just as with the offensive line, McElwain did a pretty good job of going out and getting 300-pound college-ready frames on both sides of the lines that can play. And I think you're forgetting somebody and kind of overlooking him as Kyrie Campbell. And I'm going to admit to you right now.
And Bill, I don't know why. I even like when he got signed. You're right. I overlooked that guy probably more than first of all, him being an early enrollee, kind of, I get, or he gets overlooked. And then, of course, not the high profile guy that he's coming in. When he was signed, I was completely happy with it. But you're right. I do completely overlook him.
Well, look, the guy didn't have a lot of options. I know he said that Penn State was recruiting him. I had heard from one person that, James Madison may have been the guy's other committable offer at the time Florida came in and got him. But I watched the guy's tape, and I'm not going to say he's a quick twitch guy like Dom Easley. He's not a guy that's going to just destroy people with his first step. But the guy has a pretty high motor. He moves his body well for a guy that's maybe 300 plus. I think he's stout enough to come in there and get quality snaps from day one out there. I mean, he's got a year in prep school, so his body's a year older than some other freshmen coming in. I think they've got what they need to provide some depth, but they are going to be young. So those guys are going to take their lumps early on, but I do think they've got the guys. The problem is you've got one guy that went to prep school in Kyrie Campbell, so we really don't know what his academic commitment is like at this point. Has it turned around? You've got another guy in Daryl Slayton who was dropped by Michigan for the lack of a test score. Hopefully that was just an oversight. Maybe they just didn't get it in time. Everything's fine. But these guys have got to get eligible, and they've got to stay eligible. And if you look over the history of Florida in recent years with defensive tackle, you talk about a checkered past, man. You have guys that have, for one reason or another, for off the field concerns, Torrey Davis, Gary Brown, Marcus Thomas, Leon Orr, J.R. Boswick. There's been a ton of them that have exited the program. But then you've also got guys like Dom Easley, Sharif Floyd, Caleb Brantley that came in with these circumstances that were sketchy at best at the start, and they went on to be stars. So we need them to be the Sharif Floyds and Dom Easleys and stay on the straight and narrow, and we could have something special here.
Yeah, Bill, I know you're a recruiting, guru. And nerd. As far as nerd, guru, I like the word guru. So what are the chances that, Florida can kind of make a push for Xavier Thomas, that big defensive end out of IMG Academy next year? I mean, he might end up being the number one player in the country.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that he's leaning Florida's direction right now. I don't see any crystal balls coming his way. I think what he's indicated lately is maybe that he's not leaning that way. But at the same time, like we talked about, Florida's got some hired guns on their roster now. I would stick Seider on. You've got a connection there with Rumpf, who's got high school coaching experience in South Carolina. Mm-hmm. They got to go get somebody like that, especially after this year.
What about Pat Surtain out of Heritage?
Well, with him being a legacy, who knows? You never know. But back to your defensive end there, we didn't sign one of those this year.
I know.
Not a pass rusher. We signed a big body guy that's going to grow into a combo, maybe a 3-technique strong side end. But every year you need to have one of those first step guys coming off the edge, and they've got to get him. And he's a perfect one to get. You go get him, and you get Surtain or you get Lingard, just a pair of 5-stars in there. You're in business, and you get them early and put them with Sitkowski, your class, and you go out and take care of business on the field. It could get rolling.
I would even settle for Al Blades. I mean, he's pretty darn good too.
Yeah, no kidding, man.
All right, guys, and before we wrap up, we've had signing day wrapped up for a few days now. Anything that stood out to you guys? Have you let it simmer for a few days and had a weekend to think about it and all that? Any more takeaways from signing day?
What you got, Joey?
I mean, we pretty much killed it last week, on Wednesday, but, wow.
The horse is dead.
Okay, here we go. Maybe an underrated guy. We haven't talked a lot about.
An underrated guy? What about this Donovan Steiner, 3-star guy that we never really, we kind of talked about him being a redshirt guy, but what about him ended up kind of being like a Marcel Harris 2-year starter, that redshirted and kind of came up, because who knows, Marcel Harris could have a breakout year, the way Kiki Neal did this year. So, I could see a guy like that maybe in 2 years, 3 years after he redshirts, or possibly, is James Robinson, is he underrated because he was kind of like cast off? Would he be considered underrated?
Not for what we're talking about, I think.
Because he almost at the 11th hour he almost ended up at.
Oh yeah, I know where you're going. Yeah.
Yeah.
One last thought on that 2017 class. One thing they added that I haven't seen a lot of around here since Urban Meyer left is they added C.J. Henderson on one side and Kadarius Toney on the other, and I think they brought real speed to both sides of the ball. Guys that can help you in the return game, guys that can run down that breakaway play on defense, guys that can get out on a screen on the perimeter and take the ball to the house. And I know that Scarlett and some of those guys have that and can make a big play. But we haven't seen pictures in years of guys running a race. Pickup race in the parking lot. Like, wasn't it Rainey that raced Noel Devine in the Walmart parking lot barefoot? Since Urban Meyer,
it was actually Rainey and Percy Harvin raced at the Butler Plaza Walmart. They raced at the Butler Plaza Walmart. I was actually at school at the time, and I was at UF. And rumor is that Percy smoked Rainey actually, and Rainey was known as the fastest guy on the team. If Percy Harvin gave 100% effort every single game, Percy Harvin could have went down as one of the best college football players of all time.
Well, he's still one of my favorite Gators.
Definitely.
But hey, listen, I'm just glad to see some 4.3 speed coming in, alleged 4.3 speed, and I'm hoping it translates.
Oh, Tony's that guy. Tony's a 4.3 guy.
There we go. You guys kind of read my mind about the underrated player. I know Bill talked about him last week, maybe how he can sneak in. But, the more you watch this guy, I want to see him, if he can't make it at quarterback, of course, I think he'll get a shot in the spring and we'll move on from there. But it's Frank's or Trask. I mean, come on. I mean, we know. It's not.
I will accept nothing less.
I don't think any of us will. But, I want to see him kind of how they've used. We've seen how they use Brandon Powell in the slot, move him in the backfield. Tony is electric with the ball in his hands, and and if there's a crazy scenario when you want to bring him in a drive or two, and if he's got the arm and he can run some zone read and also have a pass threat there, I'm all for it. 1-2 drives a game or something like that where you think you can trust his arm from what you've seen from film in high school, and he go through a spring. But also, I just wouldn't mind seeing in the slot, motion him into the backfield, some sweeps, some reverses, just those type of things to get the ball within his hands. Because while we like, Callaway and Brandon Powell, the playmakers that they are, Florida's still missing that one guy where you just, you hold your breath when the ball's in his hands.
Yeah, that's right. Well, hopefully they turn the corner with that. I want Florida to be known as a speed team again.
That's what we want for these Gators. So, Gators Breakdown, that's about it for this episode where we've analyzed the new coaches and took one kind of final look at the class of 2017. But guys, before we sign off here, any more insight, any more things you want to share before we get out of here?
No, that's it, man. It was a pleasure tonight.
Look out for more coaching moves in the next couple of days.
Oh, true that. Do keep an ear out, keep an eye out.
Coach is leaving, coach is coming.
Yeah, no. Maybe get our Twitter handles there. You can check me out at BILL. At real BILLSIKES .
Is it Real Bill or is it Real B Sykes?
Yeah. And I just got my Twitter. You're killing me. The Real B Sykes. I'm sorry. It's at Real B Sykes.
I had to make sure I wasn't saying it wrong the whole time.
Sorry for that. It's late. It's been a long day. At Real B Sykes.
There we go. And Joey at JoeyV_SEC Sports. And I'm Dave. You can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC. So for Gators Breakdown, for Bill, for Joey, I'm Dave. Guys, we will see you later.